Thank you very much all for being with us tonight. My name's Mike Ferner. I'm Special Projects Director for Veterans for Peace, and Alfonso Saldana is a co-coordinator of Move to Amend. He's probably to my left on your screen. And Greg Coleridge, who we were talking to just a minute ago. Greg, if you want to wave your hand there, is another co-director of Move to Amend. Introduce Greg Coleridge, who is not only a co-director of Move to Amend, he is a dear old friend of mine. We have been involved in many organizing projects since 1990. And he and I were both members of the Program on Corporations, Law, and Democracy, which is not functioning as an organization now, but we have an incredible body of work that will, part of which we'll be discussing and explaining to you tonight that's available. So, Greg Coleridge, thank you very much, buddy.
Hey, Mike, good to be with you, and thanks everyone for being here. Just very briefly, the only sort of introduction I wanted to give was just to reflect on many of you who are familiar with Move to Amend may have seen or are familiar with the film Legalized Democracy. And very early on in that film, it's a 28-minute documentary, there's a person, a Move to Amend activist from Wisconsin, who said, whatever your number one issue is, make this your number two issue. By this, she meant the effort of Move to Amend to abolish all corporate constitutional rights and get rid of big money in politics by abolishing the equally bizarre constitutional doctrine that money equals free speech that is now codified in our what we call We the People Amendment. And I got to say, with all due respect, that has always driven me absolutely nuts, because I have always felt from day one that the We the People Amendment and the effort to end corporate constitutional rights and end money being defined as free speech is not an issue. Working on, healthcare, single payer healthcare, dealing with student debt, dealing with the environmental crisis, the estuaries or rivers or, a toxic dump, whatever. Those are issues. Those are single issues that deal with trying to improve conditions by changing a law, by getting a regulation passed, by getting better elected representatives who will be more akin to doing what we want around that single issue. By definition, issues are so compartmentalized, siloized, that we sort of define and limit ourselves and separate ourselves and define ourselves and quarantine ourselves in focusing on that single strand, that single issue, which also includes, I might add, trying to deal with stopping one individual weapon system at a time, one war at a time, one occupation at a time. That's not what I think the Move to Amend, the We the People Amendment, abolishing corporate constitutional rights is all about. It's not an issue. It's not vertical. It's horizontal. It's a strategy that by coming together across issues, people, we're not saying stop working on issues, but understand that unless we change the rules of the game, changing the system, which is more horizontal, that will make it much easier for us metaphorically to get to first base and beyond first base all the way around the bases. Hey, it's not even baseball season anymore. But anyway, that's all I wanted to say, that what this whole series is designed to do is to be less sort of vertical and more horizontal, focusing more on systemic change that overarches or undergirds all the individual issues and concerns that we care about.
Thank you, Greg. We were probably going to go back to that wise bit any number of times tonight and through this seminar series, because just as Greg pointed out why it's important, I've had within Move to Amend, I've had many discussions with my brothers and sisters in Veterans for Peace, and have talked about this. And those of you who are on the call from VFP know we've got projects and working groups on everything from cluster bombs to depleted uranium to, fill in the blank. And I can see at some point somebody's going to say, "Boy, look at this artificial intelligence business. We need a coalition against artificial intelligence driven weaponry." And we'll be off to the races and another coalition and trying to get people involved in that and studying up on artificial intelligence and warfare. And it's not to say those things aren't important, and it's not to say we don't need that information, but keep in mind what Greg just said. The movement, this democracy movement to change the rules of the game, which is what we're talking about, and we'll unroll that during this series. That movement is not an issue. It's a strategy that can deal with all of the things that we hold dear, whether it's healthcare, transportation, food, war and peace, whatever it is. And hopefully, if we do our job right, you'll be able to see how that underlies the things that we are most concerned about and have spent so many years and decades on trying to change for the better. Here we go. This is 4.5 minutes and highly densely packed with a lot of history. So please enjoy.
The Supreme Court of the United States has decided that corporations have the same constitutional rights that we human citizens have. To get an idea of what this actually means, consider the following. The court has decided that corporations have the right, granted by the First Amendment, not to speak when they want to keep facts from us, such as what's in our food. For example, residues of the herbicide glyphosate have been found in lettuce, carrots, barley, wheat, and rye, in some cases up to a year after the soil was treated. The companies whose food products contain these residues do not have to reveal that to consumers, based on a 1995 case in which the court ruled that dairies using bovine growth hormones in the production of milk did not have to label the milk with that information. The courts also concluded that corporations have the Fourth Amendment right to privacy protection, and therefore must never be subjected to surprise inspections for safety hazards or other malfeasance. A 1978 decision prohibited inspectors of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, from conducting warrantless searches of business premises. The court has ruled that corporations have the Fifth Amendment right to be compensated for future profits lost if government tries to restrict their activities, even if those restrictions are needed to protect the health, safety, or welfare of the public. It can become financially impossible to prevent a business from damaging the environment if the local or state government has to pay the business the anticipated profits it could have realized were it allowed to proceed unregulated. The court has decreed that corporations are to be treated as persons and are entitled to equal protection of the laws under the 14th Amendment. As a result, local and state governments are prohibited from enacting laws which favor locally owned businesses and family farms over wealthy multinational corporations. Moreover, the court has established that corporations are not bound by state laws intended to protect the health, safety, or welfare of its residents. A corporation is basically a group of persons working to accomplish a purpose, and is treated as a single entity in order to own property and to sue or be sued in a court of law. At one time, corporations were chartered for a limited time and were restricted to working to achieve a specific goal in the public interest. Today, corporations can live forever and may be created solely to make a profit for their shareholders. As the power of corporations has grown over the years, they have increasingly taken charge of producing and distributing food, water, utilities, education, healthcare, and other elements of human life. Having the sole purpose of making a profit for their shareholders while ignoring the welfare of their employees, customers, and the communities in which they're situated, they make a mockery of democracy and threaten our very existence. Incorporation can be a useful tool to organize society, but it only works for our benefit as long as corporate power is subordinate and accountable to a democratic state. To achieve that subordination and accountability, a 28th Amendment to the Constitution is required. Move to Amend is a national, nonpartisan coalition of citizens and organizations working together to ratify such an amendment and thereby make our government accountable to the people, not just to the moneyed interests. Visit movetoamend.org and read about our We the People Amendment. If you agree with us, sign our petition, please, and join us to support this cause.
Greg, would you like to facilitate a discussion on that video?
So we'll start with Willard, and then Willard Hunter, then Chris Berg. Please unmute yourself.
Okay, my question is very simple. Citizens United formalized corporations as people. Is there a possibility that there could be a Supreme Court decision that would undo the Citizens United decision?
Good question. Basic question. Citizens United passed in 2010, worsened, expanded, furthered both money as free speech and corporate constitutional rights. It didn't create them. Yes, a Supreme Court case could do that, but given the constellation of characters on the court, it's more likely it's going to happen by we the people coming together and pass it via an amendment, as opposed to having a court case overturned.
Plus, I'm going to jump in here and help answer that. Plus, Willard, that would take care of only that particular Supreme Court decision. And as you saw in the video, there have been a long list of Supreme Court decisions that have given corporations the right to do all sorts of things. Citizens United deals with money and politics, which is extremely important. But what we're talking about is getting corporations out of the Constitution completely so they have no rights except the ones that are delegated to them by our elected representatives.
Yeah, and almost everything that you saw in that video of those decisions occurred prior to Citizens United. So I think next was Chris, and then Susan Kirsch.
Yes, our Veterans for Peace chapter is redoing its website, and I'm wondering if there's a way to get a widget or a piece of code that would link to Peter Coyote's video to have it, people would click on it and see the video.
Good question. I think you could just go to YouTube, click, or put in why we need the We the People Amendment. Maybe we can put that in the chat, and there you will find the link, and just embed that.
Thank you.
Susan Kirsch.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I'm a founder of a group called Catalyst for Local Control that's here in California. And we look primarily at issues around housing, which is really now an issue all over the whole country. And we're often looking at how do we do a good job of messaging and getting our message across. So I just want to commend you on this short video. I think it's just really well done with your points and your illustrations, and Peter Coyote do a really good job of conveying what is a complicated message in just in what, 4 minutes or so. So to commend you on that, and just to say for the work we're doing around housing and feeling the magnitude of what we're doing, is always seeming insufficient to the problem. And the problem really is that corporations are being treated as people. So I applaud your ambition and just will be happy to see however we can do something to be working with you on this.
Well, thank you so much. Feel free to reach out to us. Maybe we can figure out how to collaborate.
Thank you.
My email is greg@movetoamend.org. And I'm sorry, Willard, I think I may have skipped over you. So please unmute yourself.
Yeah, I asked an earlier question. My concern is I'm not sure how you're going to get this amendment passed, because I'm hoping you're not going to call for a constitutional convention, because the last time a constitutional convention was called, it was to tweak the
Whoops. We lost you, Willard. Lost your sound anyway, but I did get the gist of it. And you're right, we are just calling for one of the two ways right now to amend the Constitution through Congress. There is this Article 5 convention. We're not calling for that now. We're not totally opposed to it, but not under the current circumstances. It should be said that at the state level, many states over the decades, if not more than a century ago, have had state level constitutional conventions. And many of the progressive things that are born into the states have come from historically state level constitutional conventions. So we should not inherently be opposed to we the people. I mean, overall, it's much more democratic to have a constitutional convention than it is to try to get something through Congress and then through the legislatures at the state level. But not right now, given how the states are set up and who's controlling the states. And I'm sorry if I don't get all of you in the right order. I'm going to go from Mary, Robert, Edward, and then John, and that may be all the time we have.
I have just a quick question on the background. Is it true that the ACLU supported the Citizens United movement, or they were a amicus or whatever you call it, friend of the
court? That's correct. Yeah. And they've done the same right now over TikTok in support of TikTok's First Amendment rights to speak.
Okay.
You're quite right. So if you're a member of ACLU, let them know that you don't believe and don't support their support of Citizens United. Robert.
Yeah. Has anyone ever raised the issue, since corporations are given personhood, that they should also be subject to incarceration, including the penalty? I've always wondered about that, how they justified that.
Yeah, there have been efforts at the state level and particularly California, but we're also looking at elsewhere of, hey, corporations, you know, they want to be treated as people. In some states, they have this thing called 3 strikes and you're out, right? If you commit 3 strikes, 3 offenses, you should be put in jail like forever. Well, don't look now, but many corporations, maybe the worst among them is JP Morgan Chase, that's been found guilty of 4 or 5 felony as a corporation, not CEOs, not executives, but the corporation. They shouldn't be allowed to exist. Instead, they have imploded the economy, doing their fair share in contributing to the 2007 through 2009 Great Depression, recession, if not depression. That company should be out of business, as well as many others. Edward.
Yes, a quick question as to where is the amendment now?
Well, it's a new congressional session, meaning you have to start with a blank slate at 0. It will soon be reintroduced by Pramila Jayapal, Democrat of Washington. We don't know the number yet. It's called We the People Amendment. You can see the actual language that for the most part will be the wording, the text by going to movetomend.org/amendment. And so we'll certainly let Mike know, and he may send stuff out. And we encourage you to reach out to even right now, feel free to reach out to your representatives and ask them to become an original co-sponsor, because it's not too early to do that.
That's the key to get this thing moving.
Right.
Thank you.
We had 89 co-sponsors last session, hoping to get triple digits this.
And how many co-sponsors do you need to get going?
You need 2/3 in both the House and Senate.
Okay. Thank you.
John? Yep. Thank you, John Vale.
I just have a comment that this problem, or this set of problems, has the largest piece of common ground among U.S. citizenry of anything. You know, and I remind people of the referendum in Maine this year around money in politics. I can't remember specifically what it is, but it was a pretty strict kind of thing, and it passed by 75%. You know, the sentiment about this problem is really strong, and people are already on board. They just don't know what to do.
Yep, 2 numbers, 725 and 8. 725 are the number of communities that have passed either municipal resolutions, you know, city councils, township councils, whatever, or ballot initiatives, citizen-driven ballot initiatives for this, including many communities that have, not to be partisan about it, But many communities that vote for Republicans on their city council, state level, even president, voted for this. Or city councils that, you know, are mixed, neutral, independent, whatever, they pass this. And 8 is the number of states that have passed either resolutions or ballot initiatives. If you look at The Guardian online last Friday, there's a piece, just Google Guardian Saginaw. Saginaw as in Saginaw, Michigan, Saginaw, Michigan as in the Saginaw, Michigan GOP that pivoted a couple of years ago in terms of calling for, you know, the GOP draining the swamp stuff with Trump. The draining the swamp stuff used to be about focusing on getting rid of the deep state, you know, the deep state being the professional politicians, bureaucrats, whatever. Well, now draining the swamp of the GOP that had been Saginaw, that county, had been blue in 2020, went red in 2024 because they pivoted and said the swamp now in Washington is corporate power. And they ran on that and focused on the agricultural food corporations, the pharmaceutical corporations, and the health corporations. And they turned red. There's a message there. People across the board, D's, R's, independents, realize the system isn't broken, but rather, my friends, it's fixed.
I'm going to do a little background and history, about 10 minutes worth of tops of the democracy movement. And all of us are familiar with the peace movement, with the anti-war movement, with the education reform movement, prison reform, you know, fill in the blank. We're all familiar with that. And as Greg said earlier, what we're talking about here, we hope by the time our series is over in April, it will make sense to you when we refer to the fact that this movement for the We the People Amendment is not an issue. It's a strategy that will deal with the concerns that we have from a variety of movements. So there is a movement. What you saw in that video that Peter Coyote narrated was the product of at least a decade, if not more, of research and writing and meeting and going out and having weekend retreats that the Program on Corporations, Law and Democracy did. Greg and I were both involved with that, and Move to Amend grew out of that movement. What you saw in that movie, as I said, was the product of a long process of research and writing and discussing amongst the group in the Program for Corporations, Law and Democracy, and in a couple of hundred retreats, weekend-long retreats around the country. And what we found out from coming from different activist backgrounds, the POCLAD, the Program on Corporations, Law and Democracy, was a dozen people that were invited to form a thinking, organizing collective by probably the smartest organizer I ever met in my life, Richard Grossman. We were invited to participate in that. And we came from the labor movement, women's rights movement, feminists, environmentalists, peace movement. And we were saying, how is it that we have been, you know, fairly smart people, have been working for as long as we have, and things haven't gotten better? And there's a good argument for the case that, you know, as the decades went by, things are getting worse. We're having less and less control over our own government. We're having to race faster and faster to put out the fires that what I call the madmen arsonists are starting all over the world. And we need to figure out some fire prevention in addition to the firefighting. And so the fire prevention, use whatever metaphor you want, was taking the power and the ability to write the laws away from not just the congressional laws, but to define the values of society. The power to do that slowly was absorbed by corporations due to these Supreme Court decisions and their ability to not just invest in elections and politicians, but to advertise and use all kinds of other Bill of Rights protections to make sure that we have a society that is propagandized enough, and that system will continue to work. So we thought, how are we going to do our activism differently? Because we don't want to keep going to hearings to say, I know you're going to put this nuclear power plant or this toxic waste dump in our county, but how about if we make the regulations a little better so we have fewer parts per million of crap going into our air and water? And we started saying, wait a minute, we don't want these things. But we ran into the fact that the Constitution had been interpreted by these Supreme Court decisions to to allow corporations to say, hey, whatever is legal in the case of the contracts clause, that whatever is legal for interstate commerce in the Commerce Clause of the Constitution, whatever's been declared legal commerce, you can't keep it out of your community. So, I mean, this is just one example, but it's in healthcare. And why is it that the insurance companies are writing the legislation for the health insurance policies that we have in transportation and on and on and on? So we looked at that, and that history of the corporations that Peter Coyote very briefly hit on was things that we unearthed and was later brought into more concrete form by Move to Amend in the form of that video, for example. But I want to read you just, and I'll put the link to this in the chat, something that the POCLAD, the Program on Corporations, Law and Democracy, wrote as a way to introduce why we're trying this. And you'll see in the second paragraph here something that this was written in 1998. And you'll see in the second paragraph I'm going to read you that this is just as current as anything that we're dealing with today. So here's what we told people in 1998, and the same thing applies today. And I'll put a link to this document in the chat. We invite you to engage us in this idea. Giant corporations govern. In the Constitution of the United States, they are delegated no authority to make our laws or define our culture. Corporations have no constitutions, no Bill of Rights. So when corporations govern, democracy flies out the door. This may be a depressing idea, but it's not new or complicated. FDR, among many others, spelled it out, and this is a quote from Roosevelt. The liberty of a democracy is not safe if the people tolerate the growth of private power to a point where it becomes stronger than their democratic state itself. That, in its essence, is fascism. Ownership of government by an individual, by a group, or any controlling private power. And there's something else. When people live within a culture of privatized power, common sense flies out the window. People cease to trust their eyes and ears, to rely on their own experiences. Their minds become colonized. To understand the illegitimate authority by which corporations do govern us, people need to talk about it. To challenge this authority effectively, activist groups need to debate different perspectives and strategies from those that we've used. For the past few years, we've been provoking such debates, and then it goes on to talk about the various things that were done to move forward this democracy movement. And it's been a real privilege and a challenge for Greg and the work that he does directly with Move to Amend, and for me and other people in Veterans for Peace to say, let's try taking a look at what we do and see if there's some way of being more fundamental and getting at the roots instead of just the branches of these problems that we're facing. So that's just very briefly, I'll put the link to that in the chat here. And hang on a second, make sure it goes to everybody. Okay, that's to two different things that engage us that I just read the first couple of paragraphs from, and a democracy timeline. I think you'll find this extremely interesting because that is something that was put together a few decades ago and updated so that you can look at the various Supreme Court decisions and see which ones gave corporations Fourth Amendment rights and so forth. It's laid out so that the decisions and laws that have Benefited corporate power is on the top of the timeline, and on the bottom of the timeline are things that unions have done or peace movement has done or court decisions that have enabled greater democracy. And it's a very neat, concise way of being able to refer to that. So I just put that in the chat, and you can check that out when you have time after we're done here. So that's a extremely brief look at the democracy movement that Greg and I and other people have been involved with for quite a while. Now we get to the part of the program where Greg is going to summarize and lead the discussion. Hopefully you've all done your homework and read Why Abolish All Corporate Constitutional Rights, which was on the invitation as tonight's reading that we're going to discuss. So Alfonso, finally, you can put that up if you want.
Third time's a charm. Great.
There you go. Thank you.
And I don't know if you can make that any larger.
And Greg, I'll hand it over to you at this point.
Okay. I'll just say, based on what Mike said, one thing that very sadly, and I mean that sadly, much of what he read about in 1998 that Move to Amend, or that the Program of Corporations put together, Program of Corporations, Law and Democracy put together, is still timely and is still relevant. And if you go to the website, Move to Amend, or I should say, POCLAD, POCLAD.org, the top right-hand corner, you'll see by what authority. And if you click on that, it'll take you down to these organized by date articles that we, the collective, put together beginning way back from 2000 late 1990s.
98.
98 was the first one. Yeah, we wrote some stuff prior to that. So this was one of them. One of the first things that we said that we wanted to get out there. This dated November 2010. The Supreme Court decision of Citizens United was earlier that year. Yesterday, 2 days ago was the 15th anniversary. So that was January 21st, 2010. This is November, put together by our collective, Why Abolish All Corporate Constitutional Rights. And if you can just scroll down a bit, Alfonso, appreciate it. So this basically lays out much of what Peter Coyote said in summary form, this more sort of in text form. And we could spend, hours for each one of these. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to subject you to that. But it just speaks to these four in particular constitutional rights that were intended to apply to human beings. The first three of these mentioned 1, 4, and 5, for those of you who remember in your civics class, were part of and still are part of the Bill of Rights, intended for human beings and human persons alone, but has been, as we say, hijacked by corporate entities that were never intended, because there is no mention of corporate entities, of corporations in the Constitution. It was intended only to apply to human beings, but all of this has been turned on its head. The 14th Amendment as well. 14th Amendment intended to apply to provide protections to freed black slaves, and that was hijacked as well. So just going back real quick to the First Amendment. So corporate entities have been able to pervert or hijack the First Amendment in a variety of ways. The one that people are most familiar with is the First Amendment right to speak, right? That is what the Citizens United decision extended, expanded. It gave corporate entities greater First Amendment rights than they had before. It didn't create them. It wasn't the first time. That goes back to a 1978 decision called First National Bank of Boston versus Bellotti. And the court agreed basically with corporations at that time that corporate entities should be able to donate or contribute or invest, depending on how you want to look at it, in simply at that time ballot initiatives. So no, nothing else other than ballot initiatives. But that was sort of the beginning where the proverbial camel got its nose underneath the tent. And before you know it, the whole bloody camel was in the tent. But that is what opened the door for corporate entities to have the First Amendment right to speak politically, to give money to political campaigns. It expanded through other court decisions, and then what really exploded, creating a tsunami, was the Citizens United. But that's not the only First Amendment speech rights that corporations won. Corporations also won the First Amendment right not to speak. And by not to speak, that's also can be called negative free speech rights. And there's many decisions that go back as early as the 1970s, in which one case the Supreme Court overturned a Florida, what was called right to reply state law, granting political candidates the right to equal space to respond to criticism by a newspaper of their record. So the state had passed this law saying, hey, if the newspaper comes out with an editorial, candidates should have the right to reply. Well, the Supreme Court sided with the Miami Herald Publishing Company, saying no, they should have the First Amendment right not to speak or negative free speech. So that was in 1974. In the 1980s, a classic case, and one of my favorite, and maybe one of your favorite corporations, particularly if you're from California, Pacific Gas and Electric, right? They're the ones behind the fires of a couple of years ago, as opposed to other corporations, fossil fuel corporations that are responsible for expanding and furthering the fires that are going on now. But PG&E back in the 1980s went to court, and the Supreme Court agreed with a PG&E effort that was not required to allow a ratepayer organization to include some counter information on issues in their billing envelope. So they wanted to put information in about, something against what PG&E was doing, and the court decided that was against PG&E's First Amendment right, negative free speech rights. And in fact, with a straight face, the Supreme Court said that it protected PG&E's freedom of mind. Get that? Saying that PG&E had a freedom of mind and could not be forced to sort of speak against itself. In the 1990s, Peter Coyote mentioned about this decision in Vermont, where the people in Vermont had the audacity to pass a law saying that bovine growth hormones that were in dairy products not should be prohibited, but just labeled. And the dairy industry went to court and said, no, we shouldn't be forced to do that. We should not have the right. We should not give consumers the right to know. And so the court agreed with them. And dare I say, the right to know was trumped by the right of corporations not to list bovine growth hormones on milk products. So that's, a variety of First Amendment rights. Corporations have won in a variety of cases, also commercial free speech rights. So a variety of First Amendment rights corporations have won that, again, were never intended, were not meant to be, because First Amendment rights were solely and exclusively meant for human beings. And even though this is not quite a free speech right, but also under the First Amendment, as you know, there's 5 rights that the First Amendment gives, one of which is right to speak, right of assembly, a few others, but one of them is also religious freedom. This wasn't quite a Supreme Court decision granting religious freedoms, but maybe some of you remember back, 11 years ago, the Burwell versus Hobby Lobby decision, where the Supreme Court basically sided with the Hobby Lobby, not the executives of Hobby Lobby, but the Hobby Lobby Corporation, that said, the Supreme Court, again with a straight face, that Hobby Lobby Corporation had a right, religious right, to deny contraceptive treatment funding for women who worked at Hobby Lobby under basically the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. So the decision was an interpretation of that, upholding that. So it didn't per se directly address whether corporations are protected under the religious clause of the First Amendment, but it did uphold their religious rights in upholding this law. the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. That is the famous or infamous Hobby Lobby decision. So all that is under First Amendment rights, which again, just to underscore, we can abolish, we can get rid of, we can overturn Citizens United tomorrow morning, and it would not touch one iota these other First Amendment corporate rights that they have won, nor any of these other rights, including Fourth Amendment. That's search and seizure rights. So this is, as Peter Coyote again in that video spoke, corporations have been able to sort of insulate themselves from surprise inspections. So as well as I, and we've heard about over the many years where companies, have sweat shops and treating workers badly, or plants are violating occupational health and safety violations, or any number of codes that protect the health, safety, and welfare of workers, of consumers, and the environment. And because they have won the ability, again, Fourth Amendment was designed to protect solely only human beings from, at the time, from having their homes invaded. Remember, the colonists had their home invaded by the redcoats, where they would come in and just sort of occupy for a period of time. So part of the passage of the First Amendment was to have privacy rights and against search and seizure, all of which has been violated in so many number of ways that again is a double standard. Just to say, is our rights, First Amendment privacy rights, protected these days by corporations that are invading our privacy in any number, scores of ways? Of course not. But corporations have been able to protect their privacy rights, their search and seizure rights, and prevent, for example, surprise inspections that again are harming potentially and actually, in a variety of instances, in a variety of cases, workers who are treated poorly on the job, consumers, and communities, particularly if there's an explosion that takes place, or animals that are mistreated in plants, who because of that, the food products are poisonous or dangerous, that end up being in stuff we eat, that has to be recalled, that people get sick or die from consuming things that are produced in factories that, again, are producing harmful, dangerous, lethal food products. And particularly if a company knows that, they get fair warning, oh, next week we're going to have an inspector coming in, they have a chance to clean up their act, at least until the inspector comes in, and when they leave, we can go back to business as usual. The Bill of Rights may pertain to public places and public spaces, but the Bill of Rights basically has zero reference and zero affirmation, and applies 0% on corporate property. That's how it's always been. And that includes the Fifth Amendment. Fifth Amendment deals with double jeopardy, due process, but also, as Peter Coyote pointed out in the video, very important, something called the Takings Clause. The Takings Clause basically says that if you, as a human being, have your property taken, and the government says we should have the right to take property for a public purpose if two conditions are met. One, if it is for a public purpose, to build a road, to create some public building that we think is important to do. But two conditions are met. One, it's got to be public, not private, not corporate, but public. And second, you have to be justly compensated. So whatever the fair market value is for your house, your land, if you just own land without any property, that's fine. It can be done. Well, corporations have won that same right. Again, never intended. And this came into being initially when individuals in Pennsylvania were living on property. Then all of a sudden, they discovered their homes were imploding. And the reason they were imploding or sinking is because a mining corporation, a coal company, was mining underneath people's property. So much so underneath that there wasn't enough land, solid land underneath people's home for that land to stay above ground. Well, of course, naturally, people went to court and said, hey, we should be justly compensated. Corporations said, no, that's, if we have to compensate, that is against our right to mine, our right to plunder, our mind to take what we want from the ground, whatever the case may be, and whatever the harms may be to people, places, or the planet. And why that's important now to people, places, and particularly the planet is, think about for a moment people who are now working feverishly to prevent the whole climate catastrophe, never mind climate change, we're talking climate catastrophe, are saying, no, let's not just have clean coal or clean natural gas or any other kind of bullshit, because none of that makes any sense. We need to keep this stuff in the ground. The implications of keeping oil, gas, and nuclear materials in the ground is that it's stuff that then can't be mined, can't be fracked, can't be done with, which means companies are not going to maximize profit to the tunes of not just billions, but trillions of dollars, which means they're going to lose their lost future, not just present, but future profits. So they claim, fine, you want to do that? We'll call the question and we'll demand billions, if not trillions of dollars. So this has put a kibosh and has had a tremendous chilling effect on communities that have tried to substantively prevent fracking or substantively been trying to prevent the mining and the like. And so if this becomes serious as a proposal of keeping stuff in the ground, then this obviously is going to be used as a real threat. And we'll go before the Supreme Court and we'll see where that goes. So that's Fifth Amendment. Lastly, 14th Amendment.
Greg, sorry, we're really coming up close to an hour.
Okay. 14th Amendment deals with due process, equal protection. As Peter Coyote pointed out, this has to do with discrimination. The 14th Amendment dealt with acting discriminatory. You are not allowed to discriminate against people of color. Well, corporations, as they've done everywhere else on this case, said if you as a local community pass a law that would give preferential treatment to a local business, giving, for example, tax advantages to a mom and pop store, we are going to go to court and have gone to court. And there's plenty of cases I can share with you if interested, instances where companies have said they have been treated disfavorably, discriminatorily, and the courts have gone along with them, favoring them in ways they have to pay higher taxes than what a local business. All right, the other two things real quickly. The Commerce Clause, the Contracts Clause. These are not constitutional amendments that have been hijacked, if you will, by corporate entities, but they have certainly been abused by corporate entities. Mike spoke somewhat about the Commerce Clause. This is the original, if you will, as Jane Ann Morris, who we're going to read a piece about in the next session, as she has called the Commerce Clause, the baby NAFTA or the granddaddy NAFTA. Pick your generational reference, in which the Commerce Clause was the very first instance where, if you look in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, where the Commerce Clause basically usurps or overturns the ability of states to protect their health, safety, and welfare by passing laws that regulate the ability of incoming waste coming from wherever to be dumped wherever in my state. And states, we're going to pass a law preventing the importation of that. Sorry, you can't do that. That violates the Commerce Clause. One of many instances along those lines. And there has literally been scores, if not hundreds, of cases where that's been done. Jane Ann Morris wrote a book called Gaveling Down the Rabble. If you're interested, Nutramed has it on our store for sale. I think it's like $8. It's a tremendous piece.
Just to give a couple of examples to our friends and Veterans for Peace. What if corporations had no right to lobby? Because that's First Amendment right. If they had no right to lobby, if they had no right to actually draft the legislation. And how about this one for weapons companies and any company? If they had no freedom of speech, no First Amendment right to advertise, what would our society be like if there was no free speech right for a corporation to advertise whatever they want? Now, I don't know the legal history of how we were able to restrict the right of tobacco companies to advertise, but look at how much time and money that took. And every other corporation, including the weapons companies, advertise, pay for all sorts of things that make sure that our society and our culture is going to continue to be favorable to the people that are running the show. So I'll just leave it at that, and let's take some discussions and questions, etc., about what Greg just went over.
Yeah, Dennis asked Peter Coyote in the presentation, understand that corporations were allowed to exist only to under the premise that they exist to do a common good, right? To basically follow three things: to do the common good, to obey all laws, and to what was the third one? To follow all laws, to obey the common good, and to do no harm, basically. And many did, right? They were given a charter, a license to do business, to create a useful good and service early on. And many still do, but many do not. Leanne asks, if the We the People Amendment were coming to being, are you saying that each of these many past corporate one rights would have to be relitigated to then be found unconstitutional? They would no longer be constitutional. Now, here's a good segue, actually, to make the distinction between constitutional rights and statutory rights. Now, what do I mean by statutory rights? Meaning legal rights. Corporation, we don't have a problem with the legal rights of corporations to basically have the right, if you will, to be treated as a unitary actor to form a contract. You know, a corporation needs to be able to buy paper products, right? Or, you know, whatever, to do their business, to buy whatever it is that they need as basic material or to rent offices. So it's okay from our standpoint in that way. We also think it's okay. Corporations have the statutory right to be sued and to sue. That's okay. We don't have a problem with that. It's the constitutional rights that basically insulates them. It protects a shield around them that makes it impossible to hold them accountable, that used to be able to be done when they were mere creations of the state, when they were chartered one at a time, when we, the people, directly, as well as through our elected officials, were able to define them. We can no longer directly define them. They are now defined and shielded by the Supreme Court.
And we can share, and we will in upcoming sessions and in emails, we'll share some of those court decisions where they revoke these charters. And I'll just give you one very brief snippet of one, where the New York Court of Appeals, the Supreme Court for the state of New York, in a price fixing scheme in the late 1890s, the judges ruled, and this is a quote, "The life of a corporation is less than that of the humblest citizen," unquote, and went from there to enumerate the public harms that company had done in price fixing and said the penalty of death is hereby conferred to this corporation. Now, and that judge didn't just wake up one morning and decide he's going to be a revolutionary. It was because the culture was different, and the culture has been so corrupted by everything, corporate advertising, commercialism, militarism, you name it, that that you don't have those kinds of judges and those kinds of decisions. And then those Supreme Court decisions, which have, like Greg just said, have insulated them constitutionally. So you can see why we're in the soup. Thank you for staying with it and for your participation and your contributions. There'll be another one, and we'll get notices out for this. There'll be another one coming up the 4th Thursday of February, March, and April. And we will have more time to flesh out some of these ideas that we just started introducing tonight. So I sure appreciate your patience and your interest. And thank you again.